Good morning. It is wonderful to see everyone this morning. First of all, happy 73rd birthday to the land of Israel, the modern day state. There is no better way to spend this morning of Yom HaAtzmaut than what we are going to do today with such a fantastic educator, rabbi, artist, and human being, Rabbi Matt Berkowitz. He is the director of Israel programs for the Jewish Theological Seminary of America and co-founder of Kol Ha'ot, a Jerusalem-based venture exploring arts and Jewish learning. He served for 10 years in our neighborhood as the JTS Senior Rabbinic Fellow, organizing substantive adult learning in Florida and beyond. He's a member of the Wexner Heritage Program faculty. His undergrad work was at Colgate with Rabbi Levin, and while in Israel, he studied at Pardes. He is an accomplished artist. He's married to Nadia Levine, and he is raising 3 children in the land of Israel, which is so exciting. Matt, I don't want to waste any time, so we're going to have you get started. And welcome back. You was with us last month, and you're here with us again.
Thank you so much, Rabbi Mates. It's so great to be back with the Bethel community. Thank you so much for having me once again. This is the 4th of a 4-part series that we organize for the community. 3 sessions devoted to Pesach, and then this very, very special session devoted to our celebration of Yom HaAtzmaut, the 73rd year of independence of the modern state of Israel. So again, Rabbi Mates, thank you so much for your partnership on this. I'm sad this is the last of the series. I hope that we'll be able to learn again together, either virtually or in person in Boca Raton or here in Yerushalayim. So I want to begin, first of all, by saying that in this moment, this literal moment in which we are gathered in this virtual Beit Midrash space, this is the end of what is 10 days of what we call the Yamim Noraim of Israeli civil religion, the days of awe of Israeli civil religion that really begin with Yom HaShoah, Holocaust Memorial Day, and then continue on to Yom HaZikaron, Israeli Memorial Day for fallen soldiers and victims of terror. And then last night, we transitioned from Yom HaZikaron to Yom HaAtzmaut, to Israeli Independence Day. And I must say that if you haven't been in Israel this time of year, I encourage you, right? Put that on your bucket list. This is something that you must do at some point in your life, especially the intensity of Yom HaZikaron, which is a Memorial Day here like no other that you've experienced, right? In the States, Memorial Day is something completely different from what it is that we experience as Memorial Day here. And then, of course, the absolute joy that is felt as we transition into Yom HaAtzmaut with a very, very beautiful musical Ma'ariv service last night, musical Hallel, guitar, instruments, and then again this morning. So I am flying sky high as we're about to depart on our journey, which is learning about the history of Israel through contemporary Israeli art, right? How it is that we understand Israel's history through the lens of master artists that have truly conveyed the heart and soul of the national Jewish spirit. And that is what I want to do with you over this hour, very, very special hour that we have together. So I also want to welcome you into my studio space here in Chutzot HaYotzer, the Artist Lane in Jerusalem. Since you're all not here in this moment, I want you to know that when you do ask your questions or we engage in conversation, your voice is going to be heard here in Jerusalem. This is a very, very magical studio space just below the Jaffa Gate. If I were to take you outside, we would see the walls of the old city, and we would look up toward the Jaffa Gate. What I want to say to you is it should only be L'Shana Haba B'Yerushalayim, next year in Jerusalem. Let us celebrate Yom HaAtzmaut together. So without further ado, let's jump in. And I want to give you a bit of background before we take a look at our first piece of art. So to give context, I want to say that before the late 19th century, it's quite surprising when we look at the situation of Jewish artists, Jewish painters and sculptors, that is. It's the paucity of these Jewish painters and sculptors that is most striking. And it's quite surprising given the flourishing of Hebrew and Yiddish literature at the time. Remember, right, we're talking about 17th, 18th century, and it's only in the late 19th century that we begin to see the appearance of serious Jewish visual artists on the scene. Oftentimes, this has been attributed to the unwillingness of art academies to admit Jews, right, which is an absolute fact on the ground. One very, very unpleasant, very disturbing quote that I'll share with you from German composer Richard Wagner, who wrote in an essay entitled Judaism in Music in 1850, he wrote the following. He called the Jews, quote, an unpleasant freak of nature, unquote. And he argued that since we were perverted in spirit, the Jews are incapable of artistic expression. And his argument was that the Jews should simply be absorbed into Germany. In other words, we should simply assimilate into Germany. We all know how well assimilation worked in Germany and what the punchline of that story of assimilation is tragically in the 1930s and 40s. Martin Buber felt the same way as Richard Wagner. That is, that we were perverted in spirit, but his answer was very, very different. He said the answer to this perversion of spirit and to reconnect the Jewish soul to the arts is national independence. Right? Martin Buber was a great, passionate Zionist with this wonderful humanist spirit and felt very, very strongly and indeed engaged Mahatma Gandhi in a conversation about the importance of Jewish sovereignty in the land of Israel. So ultimately, Buber was arguing that the way we could right this perversion of history, reconnect us to our artistic souls, was by pursuing national independence in our homeland, here in the land of Israel. The Kishinev massacre of 1903 is truly a turning point for Jewish history. And we're going to address this as we go forward. I'm not going to say more about that now, but I do want to say that that was a major turning point, especially for this transition of ours from diaspora to home, along with the voices of classical Zionist thinkers like Pinsker, Smolenskin, and the great poet laureate. We'll read some of his poetry this morning, Chaim Nachman Bialik, especially his work, City of Slaughter. I want to begin with a work by European Jewish artist Samuel Hirschenberg. His dates are 1865 to 1908, originally from Lodz, Poland. Going to share screen. Okay, you all see the first slide, A History of Israel Through Contemporary Israeli Art. And here we are with Samuel Hirschenberg's oil painting, okay? Anyone want to take a guess as to what the title of this painting is? Okay, this is an oil painting from 1899. Tell me what you see. What do you see in this painting? Feel free to take yourself off mute.
I got a sneak peek of the slideshow. And what I noticed in looking closely at the face, it was so cartoony, like the way it was drawn. It was very, like the expression on the man's face, which is kind of facing down, is very like, it's not like beautifully artistic at all. And it's like amazingly done, like incredible talent did it, but it doesn't evoke beauty.
Right, exactly. There's certainly this caricature or cartoon aspect to it, right? And this very, very dark, sobering sense that's conveyed through this particular painting of Hirschenberg's. What we're immediately struck by, right, is the character that we see in the center, right, running, partially clothed, right, long beard, right, lifting up his hand, right, and what is he surrounded by? He's surrounded by corpses strewn all over the ground, right, and the crucifixes that you see around him, okay? You won't be surprised to learn that the title of this painting is The Wandering Jew, right? It comes very, very critically out of the experience of the Jewish community in Europe, right? And speaks in a very, very profound way to what it is that Jewish communities all over Europe, and especially in Eastern Europe, were facing, right? This painting in so many ways represents the failure of emancipation for the Jewish people. Emancipation, right, and assimilation / acculturation, okay? And here you've got this very striking Jewish figure who is running as quickly as he can. It seems that he's running to light in the distance, right? That light is the promise of a new land for the Jewish people. That's precisely what Hirschenberg was communicating in this piece. And the other critical footnote that you have to know about this oil painting is this is connected to Boris Schatz. Who is Boris Schatz? Right, Boris Schatz is the founder of the first art academy in the land of Israel, right, pre-state Israel. He had a meeting with none other than Theodor Herzl in 1903, and 2 years later in 1905, the Bezalel Art Academy is founded in Jerusalem on Haniviim Street, right? And then later on, it's moved to where it is now, really in the heart of Jerusalem. It's a building that's become the School of Architecture for Hebrew University of Jerusalem, right? And it's right in the, essentially the center of town today. And what I want you to know is that in the early days of the school, this is the painting that greeted you in the lobby of that art academy. Right, Boris Schatz invited Samuel Hirschenberg to come to the Art Academy in Bezalel Art Academy, right, to continue his painting, to teach in that academy. But it was a vital message, right, a hardcore Zionist message for Boris Schatz to put this at the entryway to the building, right? What was he saying in this? That the only answer to the suffering, the extreme suffering of the Jewish people in this world, right, is building a new existence here in the land of Israel, right? So this painting, by the way, was on exhibit, I want to say 4 to 5 years ago at the Israel Museum as part of an exhibition on crucifixes in Jewish art. Part also of what's so striking about this painting is the grandeur of it. It's a massive painting that takes up, a cathedral-sized wall. It's quite something. And it was in the first gallery as you walked into this particular exhibit.
Do you know where it is today, Matt? I was just wondering.
It's in the collection of the Israel Museum. I don't believe it's on display now. But they rotate it in and out, but it's definitely in their collection. So apropos of Hirschenberg's work, we turn to the poet laureate of Israel, and that is Chaim Nachman Bialik. His dates are 1873 to 1934, originally from Ukraine. And what you need to know about Chaim Nachman Bialik is he was a Renaissance man in so many ways, the product of traditional yeshiva learning. But in addition to that, he was drawn to secular Jewish culture. He was drawn to European culture and became an exquisite Hebrew poet. He only spent about 10 years of his life, 1924 to 1934, in the land of Israel, in pre-state Israel. But during that time, he endeared himself to the population here, and everyone considered him the poetic voice of the early years of Israel. There are many schools in Israel that are named Bialik, many streets that are named Bialik. He is also the compiler of a very, very important work called Sefer HaAgadah, the Book of Legends. This is a book that should be on every Jewish bookshelf. You can look up any pasuk, any verse in Tanakh and in Hebrew scriptures, and it will reference just about every midrash, point you in the direction of every midrash related to that verse. A very, very important work that he created with Rav Nitzky. So he wrote this poem called To the Bird. And look at what he writes. Greetings, peace to you, returning lovely bird. Tell the wonders of that distant land from which you came, right? That distant land that we're alluding to is none other than the land of Israel. Do they know and could they picture how the many rise against me, how their hatred swells, singing, O my birdling, sing the wonders of the land where spring forever dwells, right? So in the imagination of the Jewish people already at this time, right, we're hoping and dreaming of another place, another country, another refuge, right? And this is coming again out of the background of that Hirschenberg painting that we just saw. Returning to Samuel Hirschenberg, this is a painting that he created in 1905, 2 years after the Kishinev pogrom of 1903. Okay, what do we know about the Kishinev pogrom of 1903? Right, 50 Jews were murdered, many Jewish women were raped in this pogrom, and 1,500 Jewish homes were destroyed. Right, it was a radical cry for help, for the helplessness and the victimization of the Jewish community in Europe. And in many ways, this is a visual response to the Kishinev pogrom that Hirschenberg painted 2 years later in 1905. This is called the Black Banner, right? You see all of these ultra-Orthodox looking men, right, at a funeral, right? 2 caskets that you see at the center, right? The resolution isn't clear, but if it were clearer, you would see that there is an open Tanakh, an open Bible that is sitting on one of the caskets. It's as if the Bible is crying out to God and crying heavenward. And the other very, very interesting fact about this painting is the ultra-Orthodox Jew that you see with this look of terror, horror, fear, shock in the foreground of the painting. That is a self-portrait of the painter, of Hirschenberg, right? Looking out, right, with really this sense of hopelessness, right? You think of Esa Einai El Haharim Me'ayin Ya'vo Ezri. I lift up my eyes to the mountains. From where will my help come? Right? It's that question of where will my help come that was on the minds of these Jews. We feel it so profoundly in the works that were created. The City of Slaughter, this is the poem that I referenced before by Chaim Nachman Bialik. This is an epic poem. I encourage you to look this up, Google it, and read it in its entirety. This is a tiny, tiny sliver of the poem, but it gives you a taste of the core message that Bialik conveys in his work. Bialik writes the following: crushed in their shame, they saw it all. They did not stir or move. Those who survived this foulness of the pogrom, how did their menfolk bear it? How did they bear this yoke? They crawled forth from their holes. They fled to the house of the Lord. To the rabbi's house, they flitted. Tell me, O Rabbi, is my wife permitted to me? The matter ends and nothing more, and all is as it was before, concealed and cowering, the sons of Maccabees. Okay, I want to take it off share screen for a moment. I want to hear your reaction, comments, questions to what we just read of Bialik's work. What did Bialik just say in those powerful lines?
You can put your response in the chat or unmute yourself. I just, I taught a little bit about Bialik last night, and it's just amazing that how forward-thinking he was. He never knew there was going to be a state, let alone a Holocaust, and yet he lived fully as.
Right, Jessica, the other interesting factoid about Bialik is that in the immediate aftermath of the Kishinev pogrom, he was invited by the Jewish Historical Association to go to Kishinev and interview the survivors of the pogrom, right? So this poem that he writes, this epic poem, City of Slaughter, and again, this is a must read for every single Jew in the Jewish world, right? Read the entire poem, you Google it easily, right? This poem is his response, right, to actually being in Kishinev, meeting with survivors. Right? And it's a very, very damning critical response, okay, not just of, right, the apathetic world that could care less about the Jews, right, but even more piercing, it's a critical response of traditional Judaism, of rabbinic Judaism, right? What is the critique that we hear loud and clear here? He says, right, what is the response of the men?
You're going to ask your rabbi? Yeah.
Right.
You're worried if you can sleep with your wife or not? Like that's what?
Exactly. Right. That's the, so shocking, right? Halachically, right, these men are worried about whether or not their wives are permitted to them, right, sexually after they've been raped. God.
Yeah.
Right. But can you imagine? Right. So think about, and then what does he go on to do? He goes on to remind us that here these menfolk, right, were sheltering in place. They were hiding themselves as they watched their wives raped. Right? And he's reminding these cowards that they are the descendants of Maccabees. They are the descendants of Hasmoneans. There have been times in Jewish history when we have stood up for ourselves powerfully and we have been heroic. And he's asking, right, the very, very important question, what has become of us? How have we become so passive that we subscribe to this quietist attitude within the Jewish world, where we are just going to passively wait for the Mashiach, for the Messiah to come, rather than take our destiny into our own hands? Right, you're beginning to sense the treasure that Chaim Nachman Bialik was. The fact that he came out of the traditional world of rabbinic Judaism on the one hand, right, that yeshiva learning was at his fingertips, right, he could just quote from memory. And on the other, he was a rebel against that world. He couldn't accept the passivity of that world, simply waiting, right, while we were victims in the diaspora, right? So he's encouraging us, right, to be proactive about our lives now, to remember we are the sons of Maccabees, right? That is where we need to go as a people. But, again, this was a major rebellion of Jewish history. This was throwing out 2,000 years of rabbinic tradition that said to us, diaspora is a punishment, and we just have to be patient and wait, right? And Zionism and Chaim Nachman Bialik were rebelling against this traditional strain of Jewish history. Any questions or comments before I bring us back into the artwork?
Feel free to unmute. I'm looking in the chat. I think you have a typo in your poem. That yoke is yoke. Why? Yeah. Cool. Any other comments or questions? No, that's fine. I didn't catch that. Someone else did. Okay.
Okay,
all right.
ready to
I think
move
we're
on
good.
then.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, here we are. Okay, and we turn to the artwork of Ephraim Moses Lillian, 1904. This is the cover of the Altmoyland Zionist Monthly. Okay, Altmoyland. What is Altmoyland, first of all? I'm giving you all this reading. You're going to have a lot of homework after this presentation. Altmoyland is a very, very important work by the father, the visionary of the state of Israel, right? And that is none other than Theodor Herzl, right? He wrote this fiction work called Altmoyland, which literally means old new land, right? And this is where we get the name of Tel Aviv from. Tel Aviv happens to be from prophetic sources. That's the first time we see Tel Aviv mentioned, but Theodor Herzl revives it through the use of this term in German, Altneuland, old new land, meaning that we're going back to an old land that is familiar to us, but we're going to create a new land there. So he wrote this fictional work, this novel, about two characters who get bored with their lives in bourgeois European civilization, and they decide that they are going to retire in the Cook Islands, live in a gated community and play golf in the Cook Islands. So they journey, right, to the South Pacific, the other side of the world, and en route to the Cook Islands, they happen to pass through Palestine, right, pre-state Israel, the land of Israel, and they encountered the desolation that's here. They continue, they describe the desolation. It's devastating what their eyes see. The narrative is actually based on Herzl's visit to Israel. There was one visit that he made to Israel in the 1890s, and it's based on that account of his firsthand account. They go off to the Cook Islands, and then lo and behold, they tire of their lives in the Cook Islands, and they decide they're ready to head back to the old country, back to Europe. And 20 years later, right, they go back through, right, the same route to the land of Israel, and it's been transformed, right? This is Herzl giving us his vision of what the state of Israel will look like. And it'll give you goosebumps to read this, okay? You will fill with emotion, especially as you read the chapter on Jerusalem, which describes modern Jerusalem. He even describes a light rail going through the city of Jerusalem. Shows you how much of a prophet that he was, right? You got to keep in mind, he wrote this work in 1902, 1903, right? Just about a year and a half before his death. So back to the art that we're seeing here. This is the work of Ephraim Moses Lillian. And the reason that we're looking at this particular work is, what is the feel of this? What are we looking at? What is this imagery drawing on? What are the sources that it's drawing on? Does this look like the weak Jew that we saw in the first Samuel Hirschenberg painting?
Not at all.
Right.
Not at all.
Okay,
You are able to unmute if you want to answer or put answers in the chat.
It's from the story where they sent the spies into Israel to explore and see what they would find. And they came back saying, it's full of giants. Look at these grapes we found.
Excellent. Okay. So this is, the imagery is inspired by Parshat Shlach Lecha, when the spies go out to the land of Israel, right, to scope out the land, and they come back, right, with, you know, these grapes. This actually, the image of this also becomes the symbol of the Israeli Ministry of Tourism. But the other source that this visual is drawing on, that Lillian draws on, is Greco-Roman art, right, and Greco-Roman figures. Right, so we see these two very, very built, muscular types, right? Resonance of, right, very, very material culture, right? And that is what Lillian wants to drum up, right? And this was very much the trope of the early Zionist movement. We weren't only creating a new land, a new country, but we were also creating a new Jew, We were rejecting the Jew of Samuel Hirschenberg, right, that ultra-Orthodox portrait. This is the figure that we're embracing now, right? The new muscular chalutz, the pioneer, which takes us now to the work of one of my favorite Israeli artists, and that is Reuven Rubin. His dates are 1893 to 1974. Born in Romania, died in Tel Aviv. I'm happy to tell you that spent most of his life here in Israel, in pre-state Israel, and then the state of Israel. He was a very, very prolific painter. I wouldn't be surprised if you recognize the style of his work. And this painting is called First Fruits. Okay, so again, I want to open it up. You're free to unmute yourselves. Tell me what it is that you see in this triptych. Notice that it's 3 paintings. This is the first painting that you see when you walk into the gallery of contemporary Israeli art in the Israel Museum. That's where this picture was taken. Okay, so tell me what you see in this triptych. And also, what do we know about triptychs?
They're in churches normally.
Very good. Okay, so first of all, oftentimes, right, when we see a triptych, right, it is sacred Christian art. Okay, so Reuven Rubin was drawing on this notion, and what he wanted to do was create sacred art, new sacred art, right, for the Jewish nation, right, for, right, the contemporary Jewish nation, for, right, the fledgling nation of Israel, right, the modern state of Israel, right? So he does that. So that's the first piece that's going on here. When you see a triptych, right, it's conveying a sense of sanctity here. Okay, now let's take it apart a bit. Let's do the Rashi. What do you see here? Don't be shy, jump in. No wrong answer. Remember, it's called First Fruits. Okay, look at the figures in the center. It pays to begin right in the center of this painting, right? And then we'll spread out to that which is peripheral. Okay, most importantly at the center, who do we see? We see a couple, right? Clearly a Jewish couple. I'm talking about the couple that's standing on the left, holding up their child, right? Most likely their firstborn child. This is a Yemenite couple. Okay, this was part of the Orientalist orientation of Jewish artists in pre-state years. Okay, what do I mean by that? That Ashkenazic European artists, when they thought about the land of Israel, when they thought about Jews coming back to the land of Israel, in their minds, who were the authentic Israelites? Who are the authentic Jews of the land of Israel? The Yemenites. Right? It was that portrait that they had in their mind's eye, of who the native inhabitants of this country truly are, right? Not the Ashkenazic Jews, right, that were, right, coming in and reestablishing, right, ourselves in the country, but rather, right, it's Yemenite Jews who were considered the authentic ones, right? And you see this often in the paintings of Ashkenazic artists, especially in pre-state years. So there you have this traditional Yemenite couple on the left holding their firstborn son up, who is their first fruit. Next to them, you have the Sabra Israelis, right? The Jews that are born in the land of Israel, infused with the feeling of the land of Israel, this strappy guy, muscular guy, holding a watermelon, right, on his right shoulder, and in his left hand, right there, he's got, right, this bundle of bananas, right, that are hanging from his hand. His wife is kneeling below, right? Notice her breasts are exposed, right? A symbol of fertility, right? She's holding her chest, right? And in her left hand, right, what is she holding? She's holding a Jaffa orange, right? That's a basket of oranges that she has there, right? So at the center of the action, at the center of the plot, the Jews are coming back to their native land. They are reclaiming the land of Israel. This is 1923. Okay, remember, this is when he paints this triptych. 1923, he's sitting in Tel Aviv, right? Paints this exquisite painting. Right? The Jews are at the center, and who's on the sides of the painting? Who is peripheral to the story that's unfolding? It's the Arabs. It's the Arab shepherds. Right? And not okay, on the left side, right, you see clearly a shepherd playing the flute, tending to his flock. Right? Maybe this is, recalling, right, the past, the sacred past, King David. On the right side, right, this, again, Orientalist orientation, right? This image of the lazy Arab, right, who is sleeping with his camel, right? Again, peripheral to the story, the Zionist story that's playing out in the land of Israel as the people come back. Also notice too, the Sabra cactus in the back of, in the background of the right part of the triptych. I want to turn now to two self-portraits of Reuven that say it all. The portrait that we're looking at was painted in 1921 in his native Romania. I need to hear your voice now, or voices. What do you see? What is the feeling of this painting? Don't be shy, help me out here. Not only Rabbi Mates. Unmute yourself. What is the tone of this painting?
Matt, if you're able to see people's names, you can call on people too if you want.
Yeah, I don't see anyone jumping yet, and only a few people.
So he looks sort of pensive. And I wonder with the hands there, it's not quite reaching out. It's not even quite receptive. They're just, it's very hard to figure out what's going on. It's not.
Excellent, excellent. He's looking pensive. I'm very, very happy that you drew our attention to the hands, okay? You've got this green, deep green tone to the painting, the sense of depression, this wan look on his, tired look on his face, crying out for help. What's going on with the hands? Rabbi Mates?
Pajamas that like he's not even dressed as part of like what you would be going out in for the day.
Right, maybe that's why many of you don't have your cameras on now, right? You're still in your pajamas, but yes, right, perhaps he doesn't even have the urge to live at this point. That's the feeling of it. As far as the hands.
With his hands, he looks like he's kind of like, worried and kind of,
Fretting.
wringing his hands or, fussing.
Right, good, Cheryl. Okay, the business of the hands, by the way, again, is drawing on Christian imagery, right? There are many, many portraits that were created of Jesus holding his hands like this, showing his stigmata, right? The wounds of his crucifixion, okay? Many, many sacred portraits of Jesus like that. So Reuven is drawing on Christian imagery, right? And the whole idea is that he's showing himself as the suffering servant, right? He is the victim of persecution. He is the legacy of persecution of the Jews in Eastern Europe and specifically in Romania. Okay, now we're going to jump from 1921 to 1923, from Romania to Tel Aviv. Now describe this self-portrait. What do you see? What a difference 2 years make.
From my perspective, he's got much more future-oriented. His face is still not real positive looking, but the paintbrushes symbolize creativity and, making something. And the flower is a future-oriented.
Excellent, Cheryl. Good. Okay. Now, I'll share with you a quote from Reuven. He wrote the following: Romania was forgotten, New York far away. In Palestine, there was sunshine, the sea, chalutzin, pioneers with their bronzed faces and open shirts, the Yemenite girls, the children with enormous eyes. A new country, a new life was springing up around me. The world around became clear and pure to me. Life was stark, bare, primitive in Romania. I painted in Israel as the bird sings, without effort, joyfully. Right? So what do we see in this portrait? We see a portrait of the artist in this brilliant Mediterranean light. Right? All of you who have been to Israel, right, I am sure you can feel the light of Israel in this particular painting. Right? And as Cheryl pointed out, he holds a glass of water in which we see a white lily. Right? This is a Christian symbol of virginity and of good tidings. And there it is sprouting. Right? It's a symbol of hope in the future. And in the other hand, as you said, right, the paintbrushes, which is a symbol of creativity. In the background, Tel Aviv, 1923. This is when we all should have invested in Tel Aviv real estate.
Yeah. Someone also said his demeanor conveys strength. His head is upright. His fist is clenched. My Zoom is weak, so if I'm coming in and out. That's the only reason
Excellent.
why.
Thank you for that. Yes.
Also,
okay.
Also just the fact that his hands are occupied here, as opposed to in the other one that his hands were empty. There's a nothingness in the first one.
Right. Very good. Very good. Excellent. His hands are full, right? Which is, a message regarding his whole posture at this point, right? He's full of life again. Okay, another painting of his, right? The sand dunes of Tel Aviv. Probably this is what Neve Tzedek looked like in the day. Okay, now turn to a very, very powerful sculpture. Again, those of you who have been to the Israel Museum may recognize this sculpture immediately. As you walk into the main collection of the Israel Museum, and just before the gallery of contemporary Israeli art, right after the archaeological gallery, right, we have this. Okay, and this is the work of Yitzhak Danziger. His dates are 1916 to 1977. Born in Berlin, came to Israel, came to Palestine in 1923. This work is called Nimrod, 1939. Okay, Nimrod, 1939. Okay, so what you need to know about this particular piece is that this was specifically a commission for a sculpture that was meant to stand in front of the Institute of Archaeology of the Hebrew University of Jerusalem on Mount Scopus. Okay, that is what this work was created for. So Danziger, this German Jewish artist, right, who was about 23 at the time. Okay, remember that. He was 23 at the time that he creates this. Ends up carving this piece out of Nubian stone. Right there you see it from a number of different angles. Okay, what is Nimrod about? Why does he call the piece Nimrod? Very, very much connected to what we've been talking about with Chaim Nachman Bialik. But to really understand it, we have to go to the original Nimrod. Nimrod appears in the 10th chapter of the book of Genesis. He is the great grandson of none other than Noah. Okay, and here's what we read of Nimrod. Okay, listen to this. Cush also begot Nimrod, who was the first man of might on earth. You hear that? He was the first man of might on earth. He was a mighty hunter by the grace of the Lord, hence the saying, like Nimrod, a mighty hunter by the grace of the Lord. The mainstays of his kingdom were Babylon, Erech, Akkad, and Calneh in the land of Shinar. From that land, Ashur went forth and built Nineveh, Rehovot Ta'ir, Kala, and Rezin. Between Nineveh and Kala, that is the great city. In other words, Nimrod is the first conqueror in human history. Okay, not only that, what does the name Nimrod come from in the Hebrew? What is the Hebrew root of Nimrod? Mem, Resh, Dalet. Mered. What is a mered? It's a rebellion. Okay, all of that to say, Danziger knew exactly what he wanted to create when he was creating this sculpture. Okay, he was trying to draw on ancient imagery to create, again, remember, this is part of the Zionist ethic and ethos, right? The new Jew. He wanted to draw on a strong man. He was throwing out the image of the old Jew, the European Jew, to the side, right? And he was looking to create a warrior image, a conqueror, right? A hunter, right? Somebody that was going to defend himself. And what does he do? He creates it out of Nubian stone, which apparently was brought all the way from Jordan. Okay, unbelievable. The stone itself was brought to Tel Aviv, created from in Jordan, brought to Tel Aviv. He carves it out of this very, very fragile stone, right? And here you see, right, the hawk, the falcon, right, for hunting that stands on his shoulder. Okay, you see, right, the physique of this hunter, right? You see, right, the eyes. I mean, it's sort of, there's something, very, very animal-like about Nimrod, right? And also human, right? His phallus, which is meant to be like his arrow. His body itself, right, is the bow, right? And behind him, right, is his weapon. Right there, you see his back, he's holding up the bow itself. Right? So this is, I would say, the visual equivalent to what Chaim Nachman Bialik does in his poem. Okay, this is a rebellion against Jewish, and not only that, remember when this was created, 1939. Okay, this was created after Kristallnacht, right? So the artist Yitzhak Danziger is looking back at his native land, right? And I believe that this was artistic and visual revenge for what the Germans were doing to the Jewish people. Right? It's a very, very powerful piece, right? That continues to remain a core symbol of the early Zionist narrative. Okay, now I want to take you through a number of paintings relatively quickly to give you a sense of the breadth of what we're talking about. Abel Pan, a famous Israeli painter from 1935, it's called The Four Matriarchs, okay? And he paints them from right to left: Sarah, Rebecca, Rachel, and Leah. They certainly don't look like Jewish women, okay? He based them on Bedouin women from the Negev. That's what he based these women on, right? Who were our matriarchs, right? Of course, art that was used in the service of nation building, right, leading up to, right, 1948, independence, right, very, very graphic art that is reminiscent of, right, communist art coming out of Soviet Russia, right, reminding Jews of the importance of defending themselves, not only defending themselves, but making the land fertile, right, growing the land, right, an early JNF poster that we're looking at, right, this, again, bronze-looking man, right, who's out in the field with his sack of seeds, right, bringing the land back to life. Israel Paldi, a landscape that he painted in 1928. Right, I want to now go up to the 1967, a very, very disturbing sculpture that stands in the Tel Aviv Museum of Art. This is by an artist by the name of Igael Tumarkin. It's called He Walked Through the Fields, 1967. Right? Ironically enough, this is a response to the Six-Day War. Right? You would think the Six-Day War was only about euphoria in the land of Israel, in the state of Israel. Right? And yet, what it is that Tumarkin wanted to do is he wanted to draw our attention to the dark side of war, to the dark side of conflict, right? He wanted us as a people to continue to be sensitive to the horrors of war. And that's why he ends up creating this piece. And not only that, there's an important book called The Seventh Day that ends up appearing after the 6-Day War, in which the very famous Israeli author Amos Oz goes out and interviews Israeli soldiers about the repercussions of their experience in war. A very, very dark book. So even though on the one hand, we think about it as a great miracle, how Israel came out of what was meant to be a potentially genocidal situation, and came out with the Golan Heights, the West Bank, the Gaza Strip, and of course, the entirety of the Sinai Peninsula. 1960s, Ori Reisman, this is called Carob Tree Avenue. Again, this radiates with the light of Israel. In a wonderful book I have that's published by the Israel Museum, they write the following about Reisman. Reisman was a painter of light, no less than of color. He endeavored to convey the special quality of Israeli light, a white and not white light that transforms the details of physical bodies into a pulsating mass. Painting with a dry brush, he let the canvas absorb the paint so that a pure, warm light, free of any glare, emanated from the picture. He was considered a unifier. He spoke of, especially connected to this painting, how a field meets the sky and the sea kisses the earth, right? We know in the Zionist version or vision, right, this emotional and ideological archetype, the land must be overcome, possessed, and inseminated. The desert must bloom, the soil must bear fruit. Okay, Reisman's painting that we're looking at, which is an avenue of carob trees, calls to mind a woman's spread legs depicted from below, right? Sort of the top parts of the tree, with the sky seeming to penetrate her from above. A highly physical rendition of this idea of the kiss that occurs when sky, sea, and land meet. This is a work, oil painting called Green Line with Green Eyes, 1987, by David Reeb. David Reeb. Okay, what do you see in this painting? Right, there's definitely this this sense of chaos.
Just at the get-go, starting with green line already is so, even in the title.
Exactly, right? You see the undefined or temporarily defined borders of Israel, literally the green line, separating Israel from the Gaza Strip and the West Bank, Judah, Yehuda, and Shomron. Right, these green eyes, right, reminiscent of Echamsa, as it were, right, but also the very, very disturbing images that we see on the right side, right, of, right, you've got the Palestinian national colors, the red playing off of the green, right, Palestinian terrorists or freedom fighters on the right side, and on the left side, right, this image of contemporary Tel Aviv, right, urban Tel Aviv, by the water, right, in a way, you know, this calmness, this sense of prosperity, right, juxtaposed to, right, the violence that is ever present, that's just below the surface.
It reminds me the X's, like when someone's in prison in a movie and they count down days on the walls. I wonder if those X's are representing like all those who have died from terrorism, you know, or so, it seems like a counting of something.
Interesting, Rabbi Mates. Yeah, no, absolutely, and especially in this time of counting the days of the Omer, right? The countdown to Shavuot, right? It's you know, it's very, very right that sort of you know, the X's as crossing off days or victims, right? Victims of terror throughout the years, right? He's reminding us that we can't just simply look at you know, the beauty and accomplishments on the surface, right? But rather, right? We've got to think about what's going on below and what's going on beside us, what's going on, with our neighbors. This is still very much a relevant conversation that, really does tear at the fabric of Israeli society.
Matt, we just have about 4 minutes left, so I want to make sure you get to everything. Oh, I love
Thank
this.
you.
I saw
Okay.
the preview.
I want to turn to an Israeli photographer that I love. His name is Adi Ness, born in Kiryat Gat in around, I believe it was 1968 or so. And very, very active today. Your next trip to Israel, you must have a meeting with Adi Ness and learn about Adi Ness's work. He does a lot of photographs based on the Bible and beyond, right? Obviously, what is this based on? What is the image?
I'll say it if no one else, the Last Supper.
The Last
Right.
Supper.
Okay, right. So Adi Ness stages this picture based on the Last Supper, right? But instead of Jesus and his disciples, right, we have Israeli soldiers who are sitting there, right? Look at the expressions on the faces of the soldiers. Look at the soldier that is sitting in the position of Jesus at the center of the piece, right? And instead of, right, the halo, right, or the thorns, right, the crown of thorns that Jesus wears, right, we have that bush of the desert behind the Israeli soldier, right, that appears to be that halo-like image, right? The door frame that becomes the frame of that, immediately draws our attention to that central image, right? And then, of course, the question is, who is Judas in all of this? Right? Notice the Israeli soldier at the far left that's sort of looking out in the distance, right? We wonder what he's looking at, right? Is there imminent danger? Of course, the dishes that we see at the table, basing himself off of serious realia here, right? What do red dishes represent, right? We're not talking about, well, in a way we are talking about blood, sacrifices, meat dishes, right? Dairy dishes are blue in the army and meat dishes are red, right? So obviously he's connecting this to the contemporary experience, but right, think about the resonance of that image of the Last Supper and right, our experience today. Okay, and finally we come to another Israeli photographer, Sharon Ya'ari. This was taken in 2000, called Mother and Daughter. Tell me what you see here. What is expressed in this photograph?
I didn't get why this was like I mean, I looked at this and I was like, I could take that. Like this, I was curious about. I and I love photography. I don't know if anyone else has that was my reaction when I saw it.
Right. I would hope that that's all of our reaction, that we're all curious. Right. This could be read in multiple ways. That's part of what I love so much about art, photography, midrash, right? And of course, the richness of Torah, how we understand it from different perspectives, right? The woman, right, the mother is, right, she's got her left hand on her cheek, and it could be an expression, right? She's looking out into the vast expanse of Israel, right? Probably northern Israel, probably looking toward the sea that we see, blurry in the distance there, right? And it's a question, is it, a sense of oivei, right? Or is this a sense of absolute awe and glory, right? What is the emotion that's being conveyed in this moment? And I want to believe that this is a sense of hope. Od lo avda tikvatenu, right? The hope is still not lost. Quote from, right, the Israeli national anthem, right? But rather, I want to believe that this photograph is forward-looking, right? That mother and daughter are looking out, right? Multiple generations, right, into the vast expanse of Israel, into the sea, thinking about how far we have come as a people and how much further we need to travel in this journey of Liot Am Chovshi Be'aratzenu Eretz Zion Yerushalayim, and being a free people in our land, the land of Zion, the land of Jerusalem. So I want to wrap up there.
Matt, what's your, do you feel like you're getting, as like a living working artist in Israel, where are you, like, are you happy with your fame? Do you like, how how do people find you? Like, I'm curious, like, because you're talking about all these artists, and yet like your work is amazing too. So where are you and all this? Like how you're how people know about you and all that.
Thank you. Best way to find me is either here in Chutzot Yotzer, your next trip to Israel, when you're in the artist lane, or virtually on my website, rabbimattberkowitz.com.
And I'll put it in the chat. I also put in the chat an
Thank you.
Israel event we're having on Sunday, which I'll
Thank
talk
you.
about when you're done.
So, Lo Nes Katan, it's not a small miracle. I never take it for granted that I'm able to live my life here in Israel, doing what I love and what I care most about, and that is teaching Torah and doing art. And it's really a bracha, it's a blessing to be able to partner with David Moss, Elisa Moss Rabinowitz, and Yair Medina in creating this, this studio space, which brings artists together from the diversity of Israeli society. We just finished up a program here called Creative Quarantine, in which we chose 48 artists who were each given 48 hours to create a work, an artistic response to one of the 48 midot, one of the 48 qualities of Kinyan Torah, of acquiring Torah from ethics of our ancestors, from Pirkei Avot. Would you believe that we had 217 artists apply for the 48 spots?
Wow.
Right, it was,
Awesome.
we were blown away by the response, and we had writers, we had dancers, we had musicians, we had sculptors, we had glass artists, we had painters, everything you can imagine. I will tell you, 1 week in the studio, we had a transgender artist, and the following week, we had a Haredi woman from Kiryat Malachi that asked her rabbi for permission to do our program. And
Wow.
she told us one of the most inspiring experiences of her life.
That's
She
what
came
I
with
love
her
about
husband.
art. It breaks boundaries down in like.
Definitely.
Incredible.
So as we wrap up, I would be remiss not to just show you quickly the gallery, turn around, there's the Jerusalem stone, the gallery space
Oh, beautiful.
behind me. You get a sense of the space itself, and I'll take you outside really quickly.
Oh, how
so you can
lucky we
see
are.
Jerusalem.
To hear your little
Uh,
Yom Ha'atzmaut
Yom
in the
Ha'atzmaut,
streets.
you've got to see the walls of the old city of Jerusalem.
Oh, that's amazing. That's amazing. While Matt's doing that, in the chat is a link to register. We have an Israel in-person event on Sunday, COVID, respectful of all that. And you can register. It's for all ages, not just for kids. Oh, we're going outside in Israel. How lucky are we to see the walls of the old city? So is your studio right by Hebrew Union College, or are you in the old city?
Yes, we're right. Yes, we're behind Hebrew Union College.
Okay.
We're sandwiched between Hebrew Union College and the Jaffa Gate.
Got it. So yeah, the rabbinical school for the Reform movement is, when you describe where you were, I was like, I think he's near.
Exactly.
Matt, this has been a joy. Go celebrate. This
Likewise.
is a fun night to be in Israel for sure. There's
Thank
a lot
you,
of
Rabbi
joyous.
Again, thanks to the Bethel community for this series, and hope to see you all again in the future. It was a great joy.
Thank you everyone for joining us this morning, and happy birthday to the land of Israel. Take care.
Amen.
Thank you.